Hello and welcome back to MLQ Replay. We're thankful that you're tuning in today for what has been a really exciting weekend of quadball coming back out of the international break that wasn't 2 weeks ago. And just like that, we suddenly only have 2 weekends of regular season quadball left before championships in Howard County at the end of August, which is kind of hard to believe. And, for the three of us, and just to introduce ourselves again, I'm Ethan Sturm along with Jack McGovern and Rashid Allah. We haven't been necessarily together as a group for the last couple of weeks. So now that we're hurtling towards the end of the season, I kind of want to get your opinions. A lot of things are set in stone already. We now have 11 of our 12 qualified teams. Ottawa has already been eliminated in the East Division, and Cleveland has already been eliminated in the North Division. The only thing that's left is to decide whether Kansas City or League City will be punching their ticket to championship. That'll be decided in the last game of the season. And, we still actually have no first seeds locked in the entire league with 2 weeks to go. So a lot to still play for. But with all that said, I want to kind of get an idea from each of you of what your kind of headline, if you were writing a newspaper front page for the 2024 MLQ season, what your headline would be so far this year. And Jack, I'm going to send it to you first.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to look at the championship picture. For me, it's got to be the roller coaster ride that the Austin Outlaws have taken us on. I think we forget sometimes this team is still the 3-time defending champions. And after, many of us were ready to leave them for dead after their first, series of the season, they have come back, looked very good in the Super Series. We're going to talk a lot about this, series with San Antonio. They, will not necessarily be the South Division champions and maintain that title, but they took the series 2-1 over the Soldados. And, all signs are pointing towards the Outlaws, being a very serious title contender come Howard County in a few weeks.
How about you?
So I apologize in advance because we haven't spoken in so long. I have so many things. First thing, I think my headline in particular is the fact that Boston's offense, I think, is one of the few offenses in this league that actually can rival Chicago's half court. I think the concepts that they're running are phenomenal. I think the fact that they're actually running a true motion offense, everyone's getting involved. There's no one person needing to make all the decisions. Everyone's getting involved. You're seeing people that normally might not be making these type of reads, making those reads. And I think that's that development from a team that we all came into this season potentially not as high on, similar to the Austin storyline as we talked about. Boston really showing that they really have not taken a step back. Of all things, they've risen to the occasion and just absolutely phenomenal watching them this past weekend. And second thing, personally, I'm starting to get but I'm very annoyed at how few concepts that other teams are running out there. And this is something that we spoke about a few weeks ago about how it feels like for certain teams, hammer, this idea of what a hammer is the only real thing that they're running out there. And in doing so, some of that could be with your beater. Another is these screens that people are utilizing where they're trying to push people off hoops. And in doing so, they're just knocking down a hoop themselves. And I saw that so many times this past weekend, and I've seen that a couple times in previous weeks as well. And I think it's gotten to the point where people are just harming themselves and hurting their own ability to score by constantly using that same concept. And my last point that I really want to talk about is this clear distinction between the teams that are more iso ball versus the teams that are fundamentally a more team-oriented ball. Personally, I lean more team ball. 2014 San Antonio Spurs, shout out to them. They're my favorite team of all time. But I think we're really at a point where there's like 3 teams, I want to say, that really go for that team ball. Everyone's getting involved, and everyone else really just feels like ISO ball, get it to our best athletes, and let them try to score. And I think that distinction is something I really want to talk about today, obviously. And I think going into champs, I'd love to see how that manifests itself in terms of success for these teams.
Yeah, I think my headline would be that MLQ is now a matchups league. I think it for a long time has been a talent league where as long as one team hits the other team over the head with its talent, that's all that matters. And I think we're starting to see that change a lot. And I think that's how we're getting more cyclical results than we're used to seeing. We talk about that League City series, the 2-1 win over Austin. And a lot of that was because League City had the ball movement to kind of expose Austin's defense. And we'll probably talk about this some now that I think the way San Antonio matched up against that defense is a lot less efficient. And we're seeing that all across the league, and, the way Boston can hang with New York. And ultimately, I think that going into championships, you could argue there are 5 teams that could win a title at this point. That is a very high number by MLQ standards. And it's going to make decisions that maybe haven't been decisions in the past, like what the 1 seed of the East is going to choose to play in their quarterfinal and who they're going to choose to play in their semifinal, so much more interesting than it has been in the past. Because, again, it's not just about talent, it's about how you match up with these teams. And while I think a lot of people would say that, on paper, you're always going to pick a Detroit over an Austin or San Antonio, there are things about Detroit, and we're going to talk about when we get to them, that some teams might not want to see. And I think that'll be a really interesting thing. But let's start talking about the series now that we got all that out of the way. And we're going to start in the East. We're going to start with that Boston team that Naresh was so excited about. And they do get the sweep over Washington. 2 emphatic wins, a 205-70 and a 175-60 wins in game 1-2. And then a much less emphatic win in game 3. I believe they trailed by up to 40 or 50 points at times in that game before righting the ship. They had to use timeout. They kind of had to get right, but they do win at 155-100. Jack, we already heard some about Boston from Naresh, but what is impressing you about this Boston squad that has now started the season 7-2 going into their Ottawa series?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely, agree with Naresh. I think, I was really excited to see Harry Greenhouse take the reins. They're playing in his own image. The way that they're just streaking up the field so fast, looking for those turnovers. And then, like, the trademark that I see is then being super composed around the hoops, kind of slowing up and making sure that you make the right decision. I've been so impressed with how efficient they've been in transition in the half court. They set up that diamond. They get deep position on the wings, and that's no doubt thanks to the pressure that their beaters are bringing. But they're really using that shape to disorganize the defense, to draw them out of their positions, and it's just beautiful quad ball. All of those lines that the Forge are running out there are.
You talk about someone in his image, the newest addition to this team, Senemore Yamamoto, also undersized by height player, physical player, who dished out 10 assists in his first ever weekend playing for this team. What did you see out of Senna as he joined the team this week for Boston?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we've seen Senna play with Stampede the last couple of years, and we've seen him play on Creighton. We saw the ability to move the ball, unlike a lot of players that he's on a line with. And I think with the way that Boston plays, especially this year, he is the perfect addition for what Boston's trying to do. The ability to play make, the ability to take space and just dish it out, the ability to find cutters is just phenomenal. And I think watching those games, listening to the commentary between Nick Jablonski and Teddy Costa, where they specifically were highlighting the connection, the chemistry with both Emily Hickmott and Emily Frollo, absolutely phenomenal. And I think that's sort of, but again, right? We talk about 10 assists, but Senna can score if he wants to. But just the sheer fact of being able to pass the ball, now you're getting your teammates to trust you, and I think that's a phenomenal debut for Morimoto. And I'm just so excited to see what this team can do, because they're playing unselfish. And I think you saw that I was starting to get into it with Peter Lawrence decision making. The first 3 possessions, I think, in game 1, they had 2 assists to Carson Olazaba and stuff like that. So it's like seeing these players that were historically ISO players that were very comfortable taking those one-on-one battles to now seeing those cutters, finding those open passes. And I think that sort of play is why Boston in the half court looks absolutely deadly. So I'm excited to see what this team can do with Senna and playing with, because I think Senna's line was both Emily Hickman and Frollo, with Ian Skura and obviously Senna. That line broke open the game in game one, and that's going to be a deadly line going forward.
Yeah, we talked about some teams playing to their depth and some teams not playing to their depth, and this Boston team just brings in line after line in the quad ball game. I mean, you're always going to get the contributions from the Athena Mayers and the Emily Hickmats, but Sam Megner 2 goals and an assist in the series with no turnovers. Emily Frollo 4 goals, 3 assists, 2 stops in this series. Steinberg had another 4 goals. Ethan Dillon, ball in hand, 2 goals and 4 assists on no turnovers. So this is a team that is ready to go line for line. It's not just their stars. It's not just the Ian Skurs and the Peter Lawrences. And obviously Carson Olazaba returning, which is a big addition for them, especially on the defensive side. And he led the team in stops. But, the leading scorer in a series where Washington got swept was Brian Mulcahy. No Boston players that scored him. And that just kind of shows what this team is doing. Jack, what are you seeing? We talked a lot about the quad ball players, but Boston has always been a city defined by its beaters. What are you seeing from the beaters on this Boston team?
Yeah, that's a continuity. I mean, Max Havlin and Lulu Shu, are going strong. When there are very few players in the league who have been playing, the entire history of the league. And the entire history of the league, Havlin and Shu have been, a level above everyone else. And that has continued. I saw, this weekend, their stats were great. They were a top, the plus minus, leaderboard. And, I thought it passed, the eye test too, that they were clearly the best beating pair on the pitch. And the pair that the Washington Admirals just couldn't quite play to parity with.
So Naresh, switching sides to the Washington side, obviously this team hangs around Boston in Game 3. What do you think changed in that game, or do you think this is just a talented Washington team that maybe a couple of games just got away from this young squad?
For sure. So I think part of it is the ability to throw athleticism with David Littleton and Adrian Koretsky at the beating pair of Max Havlin and Lulu Shu. So I think throwing that active adjustments that Washington was able to make, such as being able to close out much faster, anticipating the passes, and getting active hands up. And that's something that even in the commentary that was addressed, where games 1 and 2, it really felt like Boston was a lot more active of a team. And we know that Washington, for their makeup, is their strength of the team is their chasers and their ability to hit. And I think they were a lot more disciplined on their defenses and were able to maintain their spaces a lot better than what they were doing in games 1 and 2. So I thought that was solid for Washington. I thought a couple of player shout outs I wanted to give in terms of what I saw from them. I think Gabe Templeton, young chaser, had a couple of phenomenal plays where they had this little triangle that was ball is in up top, pass it off to Templeton in the wing, well area, drives into space, kicks it off to the opposite side in a little triangle, passing it off to Liz Stone or Rachel Williams or Julia Rankin, someone who's always making that cut. Finding those passes is where this Washington Admirals team looks best. Oftentimes when we see certain players try to just hero ball it or try to make a play when it's not there, they're turning the ball over. And I think with Washington, and maybe not the top 5 teams, but they can absolutely hold their own against anyone else. So I think I think as you see this team continue to develop, because again, there are such younger players and players going into new positions, such as a Julie Nutzel, who's second series really beating. I think that was that continued growth will only help this team going forward. But I mean, overall, you know what you're getting from this team, and I think this team is going to be an extremely tough out when it comes to champs.
Yeah, and I think one thing you didn't even necessarily touch on is, with 2 of their more veteran players in Riley Stars and Brian Mulcahy, they have 2 of the better point defenders in the league at this point. And that doesn't matter as much. We talk about matchups in the beginning of this episode. That doesn't matter as much when the other team is running perfect zone breaking concepts. But when they're facing teams that want to be more A to B, direct to the hoops, that matters a lot. And I think that'll help them a lot stay closer in those games. Jack, what did you see out of this Washington team this weekend?
Yeah, one thing that I thought they really improved on, over the course of the series was, the Admirals have often, been the better chasing team over the past, 5 years. I don't think they have that advantage, now, especially against, a team as good as Boston. And over the course of the weekend, I just saw them getting better at absorbing pressure on offense, supporting each other kind of high up the pitch around the point. And then attacking on like a second and third wave. I think they were really struggling with that the first couple series. Washington has typically liked to really space out their offense. And what I saw was just Admirals chasers coming to ball a little bit more, providing that support and helping them get out of some sticky situations that were leading to goals on the other end.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think to that point, one thing that I think is slightly concerning from Boston, Naresh, you talked about, them throwing athleticism in the beating game. And a lot of the Boston beaters, but especially Max Havlin and Lewis Shue, are never going to shy away from a dodgeball match. And at times it felt like the Boston quadball defense was a step slow to realize that. And Washington was able to get in behind a few times. Like they scored a decent amount of goals with Shue and Havlin on the pitch. 10 goals for Washington while Shue was on the pitch. So, another thing to sneeze at. So just something to watch, as Boston gets in these bigger games late in the season. But I'll let you have the last point in the rush before we jump to our interview.
Yeah, I think one thing, and again, as high as I've been on Boston this entire day, I think the one serious thing that concerns me is something that Washington did really well the entire series. I think Game 3 is potentially a blueprint for other teams in how they match up with Boston in terms of Boston got outscored during flag runner on pitch 6-3. And I thought maybe that was just a one-time thing. They also had trouble scoring in Game 1 where they had 3 possessions before Will Richardson caught, and they didn't score on any of them. In Game 2, they scored twice, and they scored twice, and then they scored twice out of 3 possessions that they got, which is good. But again, games 1 and 3, not a good look for their ability to put a game away or potentially even let a team come back into play. So I think the blueprint for this flag runner on pitch game, if you're playing against Boston, is especially at champs when you have these higher levels flag runners such as a Taylor Crawford, maybe just put the dodgeballs in the quad ball game and try to run up the score and try to force the Boston beaters try to force the Boston quad ball players to try to score on you and rely on this flag runner not getting caught, because again, Washington outscored them the entire weekend, a total of 6-3 in Game 3. So that's my biggest concern. If they don't get a quick flag catch, because the beaters for Boston had domination, like they were absolutely dominating flag runner on pitch period. But if they can't catch quick, is that potentially something we see coming back to bite them later at champs?
And one name that could factor into that, a player we haven't seen yet this season, is Eli Fighter, who is still coming back from injury. So something to think about as we roll into the Ottawa series and champs. But yeah, let's do our first interview of the night, and let's talk to Boston Forge chaser Emily Hickmott. Emily, thanks so much for coming on tonight.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So, Emily, a little bit about coming into this team, being one of the veteran presences on this team with a lot of very young, a lot of college players still, and what that's been like so far this season.
So I think it helps that a lot of these players play with and against each other so frequently that a lot of them already have a lot of experience with each other. I think especially in the quad ball game, you just have a lot of people with really good fundamentals who can plug in to kind of any space. Like Sam Magner and Harry always has like a mindset that he instills in the team. And those are the skills that you like practice at practice. So like I only really get to go to practice once a week because I do not live actively in Boston. I live in Troy. But I think like there's a constant, like these are the fundamental skills that we need to have in order to be able to do the kinds of offenses and defenses that we want to do. And these are how you practice them. And so just kind of meshing all that together really like helps the offense flow. And everyone's very smart, which I think helps.
So, we haven't talked to anybody from Boston since before the New York series. So obviously you guys lose that one 2-1, but in a closely contested series against a team that, a lot of teams have picked as the national favorites. What was the team's sentiment and feelings, coming out of that series? Were you guys feeling good about the series, disappointed that you didn't quite get there? What was the overall, team morale coming out of it?
I think overall team morale was pretty good in that we were able to show that we can in fact hang with this team that is the best in the country. But obviously there were things that we could have probably done to win maybe 2 or 3 of those games. So how do we adjust? What can we improve? What are things that we see that didn't work and we could have done better, or that did work and we could have exploited more? So I think just using every game as a learning experience.
So take us through a little bit of this game 3. Obviously, you guys come out and you kind of run away with games 1 and 2, and then game 2, Washington basically comes out and punches you in the mouth right away. Gets up early. You guys have to, go to timeouts. What's the sideline like at that point? What adjustments are you making? What wasn't working, and how were you guys able to get back into that game?
So I think Washington is one of the most physical teams in the league, if not the most physical. And I think it was us kind of losing our timing a little bit. And I think the beaters on Washington started doing things that were a little bit different than what we were used to. And so just, again, got our timing off. I think coming out of the timeout, it was a lot of slow down. You don't always need to rush an offense. You can do a fast break, but still be patient. And I really think that the line of Sam, Louisa, Steiny, and Ethan Dillon really were the shift in that game, where they come out, they are so smart and responsible with the ball. And Sam Magner hits 2 really great shots. Steiny gets some great big turnovers. And I think that was really the momentum shift, where they just stepped up in a really big way to kind of make sure that we were able to finish that game out and put us in the right way going into flag runner on pitch, get the momentum, and just kind of get that going.
Yeah.
And I want to say our seekers did help us a lot all weekend, which we really appreciated.
Yeah. And an all college player line at that, speaking to the youth of this team. And, you already shout out Magner. What other kind of young players that maybe you haven't played with before have really impressed you so far this season?
I think Ethan Dillon has been so solid across the board, especially in New York. That was his MLQ debut. He comes in, drops a lot of really smart, intelligent plays, is making good cuts, is really solid on defense. He can be up at the point, he can be on hoops. He's just very versatile. You even saw him seek this weekend. So I think he's really stepped up in a big way. I also feel Louisa is just such a monster mismatch in the way that they make space. And I know looking at the stats, they don't always have the goals, but the way they take space and really make other players commit to them allows the other people on their line the space that they need. And I feel them and Steiny, coming out of that Harvard program, know where each other are all the time. And so you'll see those great passes to Steinberg with an alley-oop. And I think both of them have been very impressive.
Hi, Emily. So Ethan asked about the young players. I'm going to ask about some of the veterans on the team. And as we alluded to earlier, they're mostly in the beating game. If you can, describe what it's like playing with those players again, and what they're doing for you as a chaser.
The course of their career is truly astounding. I think they are one of the smartest beaters I've ever played with, and they are always thinking next play, which I love. And I think part of the reason they're allowed to do that is because Leanne is a rock in your defense that you are loved. It's so lovely playing with her, because she's going to tell you what to do, where to go. She's going to communicate with you constantly. She's going to make the big plays. She's going to catch the balls. She's going to always make the right play. And she's been doing that since she was on New York all 10 years ago. And it's just such a wonderful thing to play with. And then again, everything that's always been said about Max and Lulu is true, where they make it easy to just go. They do not have an off switch. It's constant go, 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 go. And I think they're just always thinking about how they can improve. They are perfectionists, and that's why I think they've continued to grow and get better, is because to them, nothing is ever good enough in the nicest way possible, and they are always trying to like grow and innovate and see what they can do better. And then obviously Tom and Aaron have also just been crushing it all season long. I think Aaron is probably one of the best tacklers who play beater, in the way that she is constantly able to make hits in ways that like cause turnovers of balls and ensure that like she's not getting carded for them. It's all legal hit. And then Tom just has a cannon and will throw when you don't expect it. And I think that makes him very, very dangerous. So,
yeah. It was definitely well deserved to give the shout out to the Kieran Collier, Landum, and Lynette as well. And I think a lot of people probably don't know because it was so long ago at this point, but Kieran basically spent their college years as a chaser seeker who couldn't crack an Emerson 21. So to be where they are today is just such a testament to all the work they've put in throughout the years. My last question for you, Emily, and then we'll let you go. It's not going to take many things breaking this way at this point for Boston and Austin to be playing each other in a quarterfinal in a couple of weeks. I'd say if you had to put percentages on it, the most likely thing. You have spent a lot of time with both franchises. You've played in what is kind of I was on the losing side in 2019, and it was like a growing experience. But I think for it to happen in the quarterfinal, I think just kind of shows like the parity that's existing in this league. There are no undefeated teams going into championships. Again, they're just thinking about the math in the South is like so silly and fun. And I think it's just a really good sign for the league that you could have such a historic matchup so early on. It just shows how different teams have grown and developed. And obviously, if that is the matchup, it will be fun to watch. So make sure you're tuning in when we're out there in Howard County. Awesome. Well, Emily, thanks so much for taking the time tonight. Best of luck to Boston the rest of the season, and we'll see you in the Ottawa series in a couple weeks.
See you.
All right, we're going to jump over to the South Division now to talk about that Austin team and their series against San Antonio. Both teams came into the series with a chance to clinch the South Division. In the end, neither did. The one result that would not have resulted in a clinch was an Austin 2-1 win, and that's exactly what happened. Austin came from behind to win game one, 145-120, and then the two teams split the next two, a 195-130 win for also for Austin, and a 155-110 win for San Antonio. I think there's a lot to talk about in this series. Naresh, I'm going to throw it to you. My first question for you is, based on everything we saw coming into the series, I think everyone assumed San Antonio would be a favorite. I believe the Fast Break News had San Antonio as the favorite. What did Austin do to flip the script in this series?
Yeah, so I think a large part of what Austin was doing, I think we've seen this when we had Jackson Johnson come on a few weeks ago. He was saying how this is a process. For them, they got hit in the face against League City, but the point for them is to build on what they've been able to do and continue to get their players back and continue to grow. And I think part of that is getting people comfortable in certain offensive spaces. And I think their offense, for the most part, looked significantly better than where it was even in the South Super Series. Yeah, they went undefeated in the South Super Series, but they didn't look great, if that makes sense. Their offense still looked kind of iffy. And so I think getting people in those spaces looked really good. And I think one specific person that really hasn't been talked about as much has been Ella Jordan. I think we saw it in the League City series where she was willing to just rip shots, and she made a few of those shots when she was open. And now seeing her catch the ball, but then instead of just looking for an immediate shot, being able to find the open pass, make the right read, those type of decision-making skills for such a young player is monumental for their growth. And I think just really huge for what this team tries to do. And I think as we're seeing this Austin team grow, the biggest difference for me between what San Antonio was doing and Austin was doing was when they made those super deep passes to the backside, Austin was hitting a cutting chaser while San Antonio was catching the ball flat-footed. Now, person who's catching it in the backside with momentum, they can take the shot, they can force the rotation, find the cutter, and now you're seeing a lot of good things happening versus San Antonio, whereas a lot of ISO ball of forcing a closeout and trying to win that closeout. And I think we're going to talk about it where the defense for Austin looked very, very solid against these San Antonio threats. And biggest thing, I think, in a series where a lot of your beaters were in the negatives, the fact that the Austin flag runner game was so brilliant is just a huge boon for what this team is going to do, continue to do going forward. And I think John Alvarez is an extremely sneaky MVP for what this team has done so far. And just as importantly, Mel Kite and Bailey Fields, their influence on the quad ball game is remarkable. There was a play where every single Austin player touched it. I think it went Axel to, it was a low pass to Melkite, caught it at her ankles, threw it to Jordan on the opposite side. Jordan threw it to, I think it might have been Jay. I forget who it was. It might have been Luis Sanchez. But every single Austin player recognition is absolutely phenomenal. And I think this team is getting better to the point where at champs, they're going to be the team of old, I think, and I think this team is going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, I think, I agree with you that they've been kind of slowly figuring things out as the season's gone along. I think they are kind of starting to really figure out the pieces that kind of pull the strings in their offense. I remember during that League City series being critical of the fact that I thought Andrew Axtell was one of the players making a lot of the more consistent to get the defense out of position. So I think all of that, recognizing the players that are making the difference and making sure they're getting the playtime, and that's kind of what a regular season's about. It's about figuring these things out. Jack, in a 3-game series that's 2-1, you kind of inherently think of game 3 as the decisive game a lot of the time. But I really think this series basically was decided in game 1 when San Antonio had the lead by a couple goals and post flag runner grab, and Austin was able to flip the script and get the win. So I think that's what we should really focus on. What did you see at the end of that game? What did Austin do, and what did San Antonio not do?
Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about Austin developing a more balanced offense. And, Naresh earlier was talking about the 2014 San Antonio Spurs. And I agree. I think, we're seeing that from Austin, positive movement in that direction. And that was helping the Outlaws, compete and stay even with San Antonio during a series where, their beaters were on the negative side of plus minus stats. But at the end of that game 1, and I completely agree with you that, that was one of a couple pivotal, moments in this series, probably the most pivotal. For me, it was Jay Stewart scoring 4 goals in a row and assisting the final goal, and doing it in a way that makes you see how, the most dangerous team is going to want balanced scoring, but they're also going to want a little bit of that ISO ball too. They're going to want a little bit of that ability to beat someone one-on-one, to dodge a dodgeball and flip dodgeball control. That was happening at the end of that game. And I just thought that, Stewart, was so unique in, his ability to, break open that game and kind of claw back into it. They had to fight back from a couple deficits in that game 1 to ultimately steal it. I mean, I think the beating was strong throughout the series. Even though they were on the negative side of the plus minus, that they found moments when they could clear some opportunities, but for me, it was a pretty special, star performance from Stewart.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, Ethan, going off of that, though, I just wanted to talk about a point that Jack said in terms of ISO play and needing that ISO play. San Antonio was up 8-4 at 20 minutes, and then they spent the next 2 minutes and 21 seconds in a no dodgeball look not scoring. That's inexcusable. At this point, it doesn't matter. The flag runner doesn't catch the game. A flag runner catch does not end the game. Run up the score. You have a 4-goal lead. Who cares if they catch? Try to put as many goals on the board as you can, because even after the catch happened, San Antonio was still, they only needed 2 goals to win the game still. I think the score was 140 two. I'm sorry, they needed two. It was like 120 to 105 or something like that. They still needed 2 goals to win, and those 2 goals you could have gotten during the flag runner on pitch period, and it was absolutely insane to me that they spent 2 minutes and 21 seconds not scoring, also giving up a catch, and then as soon as the catch happened, turning the ball over, allowing for the Jay Stewart run as we spoke about, right? By the time that entire sequence ended, we went from an 8-4 game to a 85-80 game, and that sort of thing is nuts. Like, that should not happen. And I think part of that, going off of that, is you saw I literally paused it after that flag runner on pitch period, to the point where I saw Daniel Williams exhausted, because flag runner on pitch beating is extremely difficult and exhausting, and you saw him like breathing heavy. And I think that's the consequence of not being on the same page. And I think the one only silver lining I can take away from this game one for them was this is the time to make mistakes. Like, I think a lot of us went into this series, as you said, that that San Antonio is the absolute favorites to come out of the South, and I think this San Antonio team, historically, as someone who's written for Fast Break News in the past, they love it when they're the underdogs, and I know for a fact that they weren't fans of potentially always being seen negatively, but for them, I think they play better when they are the underdog, and I think they came into this weekend almost feeling themselves a bit too much, because again, the process is more important than the outcome. And even with the process, the last couple of weeks, yeah, they got a couple of wins, but does that mean they did stuff well? There were issues, and when you win, you can clean up those issues. That you don't talk about those issues, but when you lose, now those issues that previously weren't talked about start to rise. And I think it was just an overall disappointing weekend for a San Antonio team that very clearly should have won this series.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a tough season in the South Division for whoever's the favorite in a given series. I do feel that way, and I think obviously in part that speaks to the depth of the division as well. And yeah, I think there's 2 ways to look at game one. I think they both contribute. I think both what Jack was saying about Austin stepping up, but also then San Antonio disappointing. San Antonio is a team we've given a lot of credit for being good finishers in these kind of situations, but you mentioned the weird handling of flag runner on pitch, which also tired Daniel Williams out. So Daniel Williams did not play very much in the remaining part of that game. 2 different beater fouls for contact were picked up in the post flag runner grab period of that game. That's always going to flip things. And I still think the San Antonio team has a half court offense problem. And, sometimes you can smooth that over. But, when it came to beating League City in those close games that we kind of lauded them for, most of those goals ended up coming on fast breaks in the end. It was a lot of Miguel Esparza with a head of steam in transition. And when this team was asked to play half court at the end of that game, they did not get very many good looks. There was a couple good stops. I think Amiga might have had one that almost went in that might have gotten blocked, but definitely not a ton of great looks down the stretch. Jack, how are you feeling about the San Antonio? We just kind of got, Naresh's thoughts on it. How are you feeling about the San Antonio team, now as they go into an Orland series and then into championships?
Yeah, I think as Austin has developed their offense, diversified it, like broadened the number of people involved, I think it stood out more that San Antonio is not doing that, and is kind of concentrating the ball in the hands of a few people. They have some really talented ball handlers, but I think as they move towards MLQ championships, they would do well to take some notes from Austin, get some more people involved, move the ball more. That's, I think, what's going to carry them over the top, because the beating was pretty good this weekend. It was a down weekend from Daniel Williams, and yet San Antonio was winning. The plus minus statistics, and Melena Sosa and Chris De La Fuente had awesome weekends. So I think it's really going to be that half court offense that they have to figure out, and they could use to get some more people involved.
Yeah, I mean, going off of that, Jack, I think I saw it's almost like a tale of 2 halves, or 2 cities of all. Like, I don't know how the adage or whatever goes, but I thought there were people on San Antonio, and I specifically note this down, where Matt Blackwood, David Avila, Catherine Hay, and Alyssa Villalba, they came out They subbed in that game too, and they looked very, very solid. There was a point where David Avila solo carried the entire San Antonio scoring, and his decision making, I felt, as the primary ball carrier, was a lot better than Miguel Esparza's. That's where you saw Miguel in a half court. That's really one of the first times where I was like, ISO, not first times, but like something I've thought about a lot, where this is the difference between a line that's able to move the ball, where there was a stretch where it was Avila to Villalba to Blackwood on the backside. Blackwood passed it back up top for a Avila shot right through the tall hoop. Simple ball movement. It was Catherine Hay. I'm sorry. It wasn't Villalba. It was Catherine Hay. So Catherine Hay's ability to take space, phenomenal, by the way. I just want to throw that out there. I think this San Antonio team knows what they want to do, and I think it's truly unfortunate that it feels like they've almost taken a step back, because I think one of the first things that we spoke about after their first series of the year was their ability to trust the rest of their depth. Right after that Kansas City series, they were able to go 2-3 lines deep, and they trusted their lines to go out there. And I think someone that really showed off a lot of their potential for me this weekend was Carlos Prado. The movement, that's what I'm talking about in terms of all the movement that Austin looked like it had, and all the movement that San Antonio sometimes had. Carlos Prado, I think, is someone that showed every time he was out there, he was moving without the ball, and his defense was very good. And he's a former developmental academy player, so you know that he was playing at a highest level before he took a step back from the sport. So now he's back, and I'm excited. I want to see what they can do. And I think I said this earlier, the silver lining for them now is the sheer fact that anything that could have gone wrong for them happened before champs. You would rather have all of these mistakes. You'd rather get punched in the face now than you would a month from now. So that's where I'm at. Because also, I mean, they didn't have Luke Langlanay. Maybe that's a difference. They didn't have Jess Markle. Maybe that's the difference. But again, you have to play with who you have, and I think fundamentally they did not look like the team that we were hyping them up to
Yeah,
be.
and you did mention Avia playing a lot more, and I think called his own number as one of the co-head coaches a lot more than he has in past series, and 12 goals and 3 assists in the series for him. Did want to shout out Jay Stewart's stat line as well, which was 13 goals, 6 assists, 3 City. Kansas City needs to sweep that series to get the 4th spot and make championships. If they lose even one game to League City gets the 4th spot, and Kansas City is eliminated. There's some ability for New Orleans, League City, and San Antonio to be swapping spots in the middle. I'm not going to get into that. Those are the two main base scenarios that we're looking at with 2 weeks to play in the South Division. And with that said, we are going to jump to our interview, and we're going to talk to 2 members of the Austin Outlaws, Bailey Fields and Mel Kite. Bailey and Mel, thanks for taking the time tonight.
For sure. Thanks for having us on, Ethan.
Thanks for letting me crash your party.
Yeah.
So to start, I want to kind of talk about what the beginning of the season was like for you guys. Obviously, there was a lot of roster turnover. You guys are bringing in a lot of younger players. You're also saying goodbye to a lot of older players. And then right off the bat, you have this League City series. And, obviously it doesn't go your way, something that nobody basically saw coming. So what was kind of the morale of the team, and kind of how have you built from that series to where you were this weekend, getting a very good result against a very good team?
Yeah, that was rough because we both were not there for League City along with Sammy. So, watching it, not being there was
definitely difficult for sure. But it also, I think, allowed us to kind of take a viewer standpoint in terms of problem solving, and allowed us to kind of help and figure out, what kinks we needed to work out and to focus going into this series this weekend, or this past weekend.
Figuring out how we're going to change what happened and fix the rest of the season.
Sure. So, you have these new young players coming in. Obviously, Jay Stewart also jumps over to Austin from San Antonio this year, and you are trying to figure out how to run offense. Mel, I see you as someone who's always very well understood how offense needs to be run in quad ball. So what have you guys been trying to execute on so far this season?
Way to play offense, in my opinion. And so I like to play Spurs basketball. Bailey's a fan now that she gets to play Chaser for the first time ever.
Fair enough. So that's where I was going to go next. Bailey, obviously you and Jackson have primarily played Chaser this season. Is this just a personal choice? Is it team strategy? Where did this come from, and how did you guys end up here?
So I can't speak to Jackson very much, but it was honestly, I've been begging someone to let me have a shot at Chaser, and Jackson finally cracked is what happened. And so that I have a recovering shoulder injury from beating that needed just a little bit of time, and chasing's a lot easier on it. And so I've just been giving the opportunity to try it, and I'm having the time of my life. It's so much fun.
I thought you were just going to leave that sentence that chasing is easier, which, is also, I think, a sentiment that a lot of people would generally agree with. So, obviously this now might be the first season ever that Austin doesn't win the South Division. You guys could still win it. All it would take is, one New Orleans win next week in San Antonio. But what are kind of the vibes, going into championships as a team who probably, underperformed what a lot of people maybe were expecting, but also overperformed down the stretch and are kind of riding a high, kind of going into championships?
I mean, I think we're just happy to be making the new team work. It's really hard to lose half your roster, and not only half your roster, every single tall person almost on the roster. We've got maybe 2 6-footers now. This is a team of short kings and queens, and we're
making it work.
We're making it work, but that's something that we've been struggling with for sure, is the height, and then also losing some of our top scorers in Josh, Miguel, and Augie. Like, Miguel scored 60 of our goals last year, so it's difficult to pick up the slack of half the goals in the season.
I also think, just building off of that, the main focus, obviously our goal is to win. I think that everyone's goal in competitive sports is to win at the end of the day. But I think primary focus of ours is really focusing on expanding not only, newer players to the team, but maybe players on the team that are stepping into newer roles. Like we mentioned earlier, Jackson and I aren't beating as much. So we have some of our other beaters and, Taylor and Cam and Kaiser and Casey stepping into roles that maybe Jackson and I would have played in a series. And so just working on developing everyone else's, or everyone's talent in general, to kind of see, yeah, that's all.
Obviously, even with all that turnover, you guys have plenty of big names on the team, yourselves, as well as a number of other players who, played Team USA, et cetera. But as you mentioned, you basically had to fill in half of the roster with some younger players. So who are some of those younger players who have really impressed you two so far this season?
I'm going to piggyback off of what was said earlier. I've been really impressed with Ella. She's a college player still. This is her first, I think, season on the Outlaws playing roster, and she's putting in lots of big minutes. And I think that that's been really impressive. I wouldn't say that, Cam is necessarily a newer player, but filling in a newer role. And I think she's been, growing into her own as a beater and getting her style as well. And I want to just say I'm really proud of her growth and development that I've seen, even from last year's season to this year's season, or my two, that I'm really proud of for sure.
And me personally, I'm loving the pair of Daniel and Ella out of UT. Daniel especially is learning, he's a big dude and he is able to take his space if he really wants it. And Ella's just a killer. It's so fun to watch her at practice and just see her get more confident every week.
She's the girlies up.
Yeah.
She does.
It's been great to see them develop, and then hopefully they'll take this back to UT next year and we'll have even more UT kids next year.
Hi, Mel and Bailey. I was wondering, maybe especially Bailey, what you're seeing from your beaters this season, and what the kind of emphasis has been, it being kind of a younger group, and maybe growth that you've seen throughout the season.
Sure that everyone gets the same exposure to the same type of high intense play that we're going to be facing, especially going into champs. And so just making sure that they have that space and development to grow has been super important. I think it's paying off very well. I think they're doing very, very well.
Everybody's playing big SOP minutes. Everybody has stepped up, every single beater. It is amazing as a chaser. I'm going to shout out the girlies real quick. The female beater rotation we have of Casey Beavers, Cam Caswell, Maya Heimbaugh, and Brandy Gomez. I feel like it's just bang, 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 bang. Not a single step is missed. I trust every single beater on our team, with so much confidence. And it really, I think, has shown as we've developed more as a team over the past month that our beaters have stepped up immensely, and they just got it like that. Long story short.
I agree. I said it better myself.
I'm going to leave you guys with the same question I asked Emily. There's a lot of things pointing towards a potential Austin-Boston matchup. It's been a series that's played many, many times that you guys have been involved in many, many times. Kind of what does that series mean to you? What's it like kind of playing in that series throughout the years?
It'll be your first Chaser
matchup. It will be. I'm excited to get to experience it from a different aspect, because I'm usually on the beater end of things. But I mean, that series is always, I think, a fun one to watch. I mean, that rivalry has been there from the start. It's always super fun. I've been fortunate to be on the winning side most of the time, so I hope to keep that spot. But I'm looking forward to the potential of that matchup happening again. I think it's always a fun to watch.
And I just love playing my pals from Boston.
Love them. Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you to both of you for taking the time tonight. Best of luck in the rest of the season. We will see you at championships.
Thanks, guys.
All right, so let's jump over to our North Super Series, our last series of the week. And I apologize for how long we're going, but I think a lot of interesting things to talk about this week. We kind of stacked 3 huge series on top of each other this weekend, and just makes things a little bit trickier. But yeah, Detroit, Minneapolis, and Cleveland were the combatants in the Super Series. And Detroit's the one who won out with a 6-0 sweep on the weekend. Minneapolis got close in the first 2 games, a 125-60 win and a 135-80 win. Series at a time, let's try to take it one team at a time. So let's start with the team that went 6-0, Detroit. Detroit with the 6-0 is guaranteed to finish top 2 in the North Division. This will be the first time the franchise ever finishes top 2 in the North Division. Naresh, what have you seen from this Detroit team that is now 10-2 to finish the regular season?
Yeah, I mean, I am on record a few weeks ago saying that I think Detroit is making the semifinals. Maybe I was a bit too hasty there, but I do think that this Detroit team has a lot of good things going for them. I think their offense, I think when I said earlier, there was like 3 teams that really are going into that team ball aspect. I think why I was so hesitant about the 3, I think Detroit is right on the cusp of really unlocking their offense. Right now, there are a lot of just drive and it's a drive and react offense. Whether if someone reacts to them, they're dishing it out to the opposite side or dunking it themselves. And so I think they really have the ideas of what to do at a higher level. But my only concern with them right now is we saw it in the beginning of that Cleveland game in game 1, where at I think like 5 minutes, score was 1-0. At around like 10 minutes, it was like 3-0. And it's like, and again, Cleveland had a phenomenal weekend, and we are going to definitely talk about Cleveland going forward. But I think when you talk about those type of mismatches, quote unquote, especially when you see it on paper, you're wanting a better performance out of Detroit immediately, because that sort of slow start can't hold up when you play against, and again, right now, you're only guaranteed 2 games, maybe 2 games against Boston or New York. That sort of thing, you can't afford a slow start. Good things, though. Again, like I said, their offense, when it is clicking, when they are all moving, it looks very fun to watch. They have a bunch of really fun players, a really couple of athletes that can absolutely just take space and finish at hoops. And obviously, a large part of that starts with their star in Leo Freed, who's actively putting in marathon minutes for them at points. I think initially I was very hesitant to say that was a good thing. Because if you're at this point, if you're playing 12, 13 minutes as your star quad ball player, that's rough. But I think again with Detroit, because they're only guaranteed 2 games, honestly, sell out. Put your best players on the field, and I think they've shown that they trust. They're almost 3 lines deep, and they trust all of their players. So I think that's something that I'm very excited about, and I think going off of their Toronto series, the continued growth of Gwen Pratt and Lindsey Smyers are absolutely phenomenal. And specifically Gwen Pratt, their ability to take space and manipulate a defense is absolutely phenomenal. And their ability to stand tough while the ball's coming into them and catch and finish and get those really athletic moves to, hey, if you're guarding the front of the hoop, I will duck right under you and score behind the hoop. That those sort of athletic finishes are they can't be necessarily taught, and so that natural instinct of Pratt to be able to get those type of scores off is a lot of fun to watch. Ryan and Ray, enough. I mean, we've talked about them enough. We can always talk about them more though. But in terms of beater depth, that's my only real concern with Detroit. I think David Banis and Brooke Smiley have performed very, very well in their shifts, and I think Ryan and Ray going into David Banis and Brooke Smiley is a very, very solid 1-2 punch. However, if you're starting to play against either of the East 1 or 2s, you're going to see 3-4 beaters deep with Boston or New York, and so how do they match up against that is my biggest question. But overall, I know it sounds like I'm down on Detroit. I think Detroit came out, and even with slower startups, even when they might not have been clicking on 100%, they still showed that they were able to take teams out of range and still showed why they are easily one of the top 2 teams in the North with Chicago. So overall, great weekend for Chicago. I'm sorry, great weekend for Detroit. And now it gives them a month to really hone in on their strategies. And again, they actually might have an advantage because they know who they're going to play. They're either playing New York or they're either playing Boston, and so you can prep. You have an entire month.
But exactly there. This team was never going to be world beaters coming into the season. I don't think anybody saw that as a realistic expectation. What this team is going to be at championships, and obviously everything gets a little muddled because, as you said, they have to go right into a quarterfinal against a very good team. But this team is so well built to be spoilers. This team continues to catch. So that's one thing that's really scary from a spoiler. They play really good defense. Less than 8 goals allowed all season per game. And we saw it against Chicago. They kept those games gritty and low scoring. We saw against Minneapolis, those games were super gritty and low scoring. If you can't separate from a team and they're going to get your flag runner, things get very difficult. So I really like and they have an elite beater pair, and I think you always want that in a spoiler. What concerns me is that I agree with Naresh that I think conceptually their offense wants to be there, and it's not quite there. It is set up to execute. It sometimes isn't finding that last step. I feel like the offense goes sometimes. Like there's one more pass there to break down the defense, and they don't make it. They kind of go for the shot on the one pass before that, or they're just kind of passing the ball without, and sometimes that's not necessarily moving defense around. But what I think is interesting here is that even in this Minneapolis series, even like the defining series of their season, they're, with the exception of Fried, who is playing huge minutes, there still seem to be, experimenting some in their lines. They weren't starting, Gwen Pratt in these games. And I think Pratt is the player who's taking the space and opening things up and making that extra pass in the offense a lot of the time. And we were seeing that in the Chicago series. The way that they could work off of Leo Fried in those ways and play that middle spot, because Leo Fried doesn't necessarily want to be that middle person. They want to be on a wing. Obviously they also didn't have Julian Toyarkov again this weekend, and we don't technically know if he will be ready for a championship. But I mean, there's plenty of other teams that if their second best quadball player wasn't available for 3 series back to back, and those teams go 9-0 in those series, we'd say, hey, it's going to be really exciting when that player shows back up.
Ethan, you muted yourself, bud.
So I think there's give and take with this team. The highs and the lows that you can look at from this series, but it's hard to fault a team who put 10 wins together in a regular season. Jack, I feel like we've left you hanging over there on 2 long monologues, but you want to give your Detroit thoughts?
No, it was well said. I think Detroit is a team that knows their identity at this point, and I agree with what's been said. I mean, on the positive side, this is a real achievement. Detroit, I believe, had only ever beaten Minneapolis in a single game once, and I don't think Detroit had finished third even in the North Division since the division was a 4-team division. So to make that jump over Minneapolis and then finish, second in the division, earn that automatic qualification spot into the bracket is like a really big deal. When you take the long view of this like Detroit franchise. So props to them, for getting it done with 2 sweeps. I like, what they do in the beating game. I think the emergence of Brooke Smiley and David Bannis as a pair, has been a real storyline this season, and makes them competitive with any team in the league from a beating standpoint. I feel like playing behind Ryan Stu and Ray Brodeur. In the chasing game, I agree with your assessment. Like, I think, they need to be looking for ways to make that extra pass. I've really liked what players like, Brady Sowers and Ashton Glenn have brought to the Innovators. Just fearlessness, energy, willingness to try to break a tackle, and run, down the throats of the opposing defense. Like, those are valuable skills. I do think they continue to really miss Julian Toyakov. So, that's the biggest question for me in, evaluating whether Detroit can be, a serious threat in bracket play at MLQ championships. I mean, they've really come together, without Toyakov, but Julian just takes them to another level.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's worth shouting out this team is just like how homegrown and young this product is, right? Like, this is an area that doesn't have a lot of really club teams, immediately in the area. This is started his career in MLQ. So it is really cool to see, they've come this far. Let's jump to the next team, team that went 3-3 on the weekend, the Minneapolis Monarchs. And kind of a strange weekend for them. I mean, coming in a little bit under rostered, missing some very key players, your Emma Persons and your, Max Myers, etc. Didn't necessarily expect, for them to be starting the game with Nathan Badalski at Chaser for the first game against Detroit. That wasn't the first thing I had on my bingo card, but ultimately they got the results they needed against Cleveland, and they were competitive game in and game out against Detroit, even if they didn't pick up any wins. It's been a strange season for Minneapolis, I would say, top to bottom so far. And Naresh, what have you seen from them?
I don't get it. I don't understand, right? You've seen what this Minneapolis team can do the last couple of years. Been at the top of the league in the North the last couple of years. We're still missing catches. That's not great. But I think in terms of even just the physical mistakes, I think in terms of strategy, they're still running a box-ish offense. And if they can get those one-on-ones, and we didn't really get those one-on-ones when we saw it on the film, like, other than Joe Glay, we didn't really see people that are wanting to take on those one-on-ones and get those good looks. And again, especially against Detroit with those physical defenders, didn't really see that against them that much either. And I think certain points when Ben Schluter was on the field with his ability to just let it rip and be a bit more chaotic, that was very good to see. I thought Nathan Badalski, when he did switch back into beating parts of day two, that looked, again, Nathan Badalski is a very solid beater, very good beater that's played in a lot of high level minutes the last couple of seasons. You saw the impact that these beaters have been able to do, but right now I think more than anything else, I think their beaters, for the most part, are giving Minneapolis a chance to win. I think right now I'm just so disappointed in Minneapolis's quad ball game because there doesn't seem to be a cohesive plan of attack. And it's tough when you don't have four of your top scorers for sure, but there still needs to be a better plan of attack in terms of how you want to achieve your goals. And I think that's where right now I'm just wanting more from Minneapolis because we've seen them do that. And so that's where I'm just like slightly disappointed.
Yeah, and I mean, I will credit, I do think they did come out in more of a diamond offense. I do think things were at least a little bit more dynamic on offense than what we saw in that Chicago series. They are still settling for a lot of shots. I mean, in their defense, Joe Goulet is very good at hitting those shots. But, shots are never the easiest goals. And, I'm not here to discourage shots. I love shooting. JJ is the best quad ball player in the sport right now. He loves shooting. There's nothing wrong with shooting, but they're never necessarily the easiest goals. If there's easier goals that you can find, you want that to always be part of your offensive profile. And right now, everything does seem a little bit hard for Minneapolis on offense, even with their beaters, kind of creating those opportunities. And, you mentioned Schluter and Podolski, but I also thought that Narveson and Melby playing together this weekend did some really good things. I thought they took it to Brodeur and Sue at some points. So, you know, that I agree with you. That's not the area that's worrying me. This offense needs to get off the ground. It hasn't gotten off the ground in 9 games, and now they need to play Toronto to even lock down the 3rd place spot in this division. And it's going to have to get off the ground against that team because there is plenty of talent in that squad. That team is physical. That team can score. So yeah, that's what it'll be interesting to see. The other thing that's concerning me, and it's something that's never been an issue for Minneapolis, is they've caught 1 flag runner in 9 games this season. This is a team that's had so many good seekers in the program, and you know, maybe some of it is that they've had to make strategic sacrifices because of what they're trailing in a game, etc. But I mean, you know, Joe Goulet is a player that's, you know, very well regarded for his seeking, and you know, they've got plenty of other people who can catch a flag as well. So you know, those are the things that scare me. And you know, Toronto's been good in the flag runner game so far this season, so that's something to look out for in that matchup when it comes. But yeah, I would say this is a team that was very short rostered and did get what they needed, but obviously they wanted that Detroit win. They wanted a chance to get that by the quarterfinals. That eluded them last season as well, and it wasn't to be. Jack, what did you see from Minneapolis?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it was better than, you know, against Chicago. I think, you know, the beating is deep, and that's going to, you know, work towards the Monarchs' advantage in the play-in bracket. Like, you know, I don't know if they have as many beaters, or if other teams in the play-in bracket are going to have as many experienced beaters as the Monarchs. I just think they're really missing, you know, athleticism, dynamism in the chasing game. And that was, you know, especially true this weekend without Emma Persons, without Max Meyer, without Terry Carlson. But yeah, I mean, you know, I think I wrote my player to watch blurb heading into the week, a little bit more physicality, a little bit more speed into the chasing game, because you know, they were good things. They were incorporating more picks into the offense. I saw, especially against Cleveland, that created some opportunities. They have players who are good at kind of using their size around the hoops to like box out and like, you know, essentially post up. You know, that's a look that can work. But yeah, I think, you know, they, you know, should figure out ways to get a little bit more athletic in the chaser game. And it might just be about, you know, moving around the lines, or giving some players, you know, a shot that you know, maybe haven't you know, played a ton. So yeah, I think, you know, this is a really good and smart program for and has been for a really long time. So you know, I think come the play-in bracket, they'll figure something out.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Jack, I really just want to piggyback off of that. I know it sounded like I was very negative towards a lot of what I was saying with Minneapolis. If this team comes out at champs day 1 and they absolutely make a run through the play-in bracket the way they did last year, would I really be surprised? Not really, right? This is a team that, as you said, if you have the beater depth that they do and the seeker depth that they do, I would not be surprised with anything that they're able to do. And again, they played the only, to be absolutely fair, the only losses they've had this season were to Detroit, who we said was right on the fringe of being a title contender, and they lost to Chicago, again, another title contender. So it's one of those things where I think when it comes to champs, when they get all their players back, if they are able to just, if it all comes together and they make that monster run, everything we've spoken about is moot, because they have a month to get the Toronto games in and then prep that and use that for champs. But yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, I think this team's ceiling is still very high. They just need to get there and just piece everything together.
All right, and let's talk about the last team, a team that's, you know, finishing up their season with this series. That's the Cleveland Riff. Like we said, I really kind of ended on a high note with that Minneapolis series where they averaged over 80 points a game, something they haven't been able to do yet this season. You know, we've talked to the coaching staff already. We talked about this kind of being a building season, and I think they can really hang their heads on something this weekend. What did you see, Jack?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Taylor Freeman, because yeah, that performance was just a really great story. You this weekend. Exactly as you said, a player who hadn't been scoring, who then, led the team in scoring the last weekend. That's something you can build on heading into next year. Another thing that, I think Cleveland can build on, that we haven't talked about nearly enough, I think, is Peter Brechting's, position switch to beater. This is really remarkable because Peter Brechting was their best chaser, their best quad ball player, last year and had been for several seasons in a row. And then Brechting walks in and first season as a beater, their best, beater. 7 stops against Minneapolis, the best plus minus on the team, 12 stops against Detroit. So that's a significant performance, kind of tipping the scales into the game, and they were doing some interesting things in the beater game too. It wasn't always working out, but sometimes they would just kind of rush out at the chasers, and it created opportunities for Minneapolis and Detroit to score on them sometimes, but they were mixing up the looks that they were throwing at opposing offenses. And yeah, I liked what the Riff were doing in the beating game, headlined by Brechting.
Yeah, and Brechting also managed to steal 3 goals in that Detroit series as well, while also leading the team with 12 stops in the beater game. Naresh, any final thoughts on this Cleveland team?
Yeah, I mean, I think we said this when we spoke with Jack Mosley a couple of weeks ago when they played Chicago. It was definitely tough because they were short rostered beater wise, and that was when we first saw Peter Brechting, and that's when we spoke on that MLQ replay where we said, hey, they looked good at points with certain beaters being out there, and I think this was the breakout weekend for Peter Brechting specifically. The entire time I was watching the first couple of games, day one, it was remarkable seeing how locked down their defense was. I said it earlier. It was 1-0 at around 5 minutes. It was 3-0 at around 10 minutes. And this is a team that doesn't have a win in the year, but they're going out there and showing everyone that they can compete, even if it's not for a full 20. Because again, this team has a lot of players that are still in college, don't really have an official team, USQ wise. So they're playing with a lot of young talent. And the fact that they're able to do this and really put together a weekend that they should be very, very proud of. And I think it starts with Brechting, obviously, but I think someone else who's really one of my favorite players in this sport is Joe Lombardi. I think Lombardi as the anchor to that team, whether it's defensively, offensively. There was one play in Game 3 against Minneapolis where it was Brechting in the middle when he came in at chaser. It was against Minneapolis where Lombardi made a backdoor cut right to the tall hoop. Brechting finds him. Lombardi finishes. That sort of play where you're a bit more dynamic with your movement allows for this team to get those type of goals that they did. And I think the with Fiona Gaffney still on that team as the assistant coach and being in all the right spots. And again, that's where even if you're making physical mistakes, the ability to be in the right spot is more important because physical mistakes you can take care of. That's a rep issue. And so the more they rep it, this team is only going to get better. And I think we saw this last year as well with this Cleveland team where they went into North Champs and really, really gave Detroit a run for their money. And now we're seeing it again for Cleveland where as the season progressed, they've shown that they're going to continue to get better. I know it's a tough way for them to – I know it's a tough – anytime it's tough to not get a win in the season, but they really, I think, have they have the stepping stones in place, the building blocks in place to really come back next summer and just really ball out.
For sure. All right, so that is going to do it for our talk about the series. We're going to go to our last interview, talk to the head coach of Minneapolis Monarchs, Cody Narveson. Cody, thanks as always for taking the time tonight, and thanks for waiting. We try to always keep it a crisp 60 minutes. It just wasn't the case tonight.
No, it's all good. Thanks, fellas. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And also, obviously, I apologize for making you sit all that time just for, Naresh to, really bring up the struggles of the season. But, I mean, obviously it has been a tumultuous season for a team that's had a lot of success in recent years. And, in some ways you could argue, the schedule hasn't necessarily been your friend. Obviously, you have to play a Super Series very far from home. You have to open up with, that marquee series against Chicago. So I'm actually going to start there since we haven't talked to you guys this season with that Chicago series. Obviously, I don't think necessarily the strongest effort that we've ever seen from you guys in that rivalry that has brewed over the last 3 or 4 years. Coming out of that series, what did you guys kind of look at as what wasn't working or what you need to change after that opener?
Yeah. So this series, or rather this season for us, really has been defined by us kind of looking at our success in recent seasons, obviously not so much last season, barring MLQ champs, and kind of coming away determining, we're losing ground to the champs of the division. Chicago clearly has our number. They've really got something working. We know Detroit is on the upswing. They've been building this program very steadily, very obviously, and very beautifully over the last several seasons. And we know, everybody else is kind of on the way up, just because that's the nature of things, unless you're like an Austin Outlaws and you can maintain dominance over your division for a long period of time. So we know that that's coming. We know that we have talent sort of on the way out. We know, Northeast beloved Henry Bear Benson is not able to commit to a full summer season. We know we're not going to have the likes of Gracie, Joe Blanchard, Cole Lockmiller. So with these individuals that have previously kind of helped define the culture of the team, and us being a program that has previously sort of built our systems around the strengths and skill sets of individual players. A lot of it was coaches, myself, Nathan, Emma, Obi, kind of going back to the drawing board and determining we need to define the system, because I knew we had a lot of first-year MLQ players, and I think after looking through the MLQ Slack, I think I saw that we were like tied for the most MLQ rookies out of any MLQ franchise. So especially for those new folks coming into the fold, having, really just, I've talked about being surgical with this, sort of at the start of the season. I know other coaches kind of approach it the same way, and uniting club and college players, like we really need to kind of break things down, going an extra step further for us, this year, and not getting that first test to find if things are working until the Chicago series is sort of tough, because it's easy to tell first-year players in practice, like you need to drive and pass as you're getting beat. Easy enough to say in that sort of setting. More difficult when you have to tell them, okay, you need to wait till Tad's about to throw the dodgeball at you, and then you need to throw the quaffle over there, or the quad ball over there. So we learned some things from that Chicago series. Not necessarily enough indicators for us to determine we were necessarily doing something wrong, and we knew that the Super Series this last weekend would also be tough, just because we were without a lot of our usual creators on offense, and so needing to find goals, ball movement from other sources was certainly a challenge. Not necessarily the most thrilled with how things turned out, but I think as y'all gestured at, we got what we needed from that weekend. We have a few weeks to go back to the drawing board. A lot of us are taking our first trip internationally to Toronto in a couple weekends, and so going there and playing them will be great. Hopefully we can execute in the way that we need to leading up to Champs did. Hopefully go on another run. That would be, I think all of our, the thing that we have in the back of our minds. If we can come out and execute like that at Champs like we did last year, I think a lot of us would be really happy.
Yeah, and I think we could argue it's a bit of a failure on our part, as the media, that Minneapolis has kind of always been kind of this blob of player personnel, and I think it gets a lot of credit for being very similar to the club team and the MLQ team, with obviously University of Minnesota factored in as well, and it's awesome to see that university be on the upswing that they've been on. But because of that, and sure, maybe yourself and Gracie and Emma and Obi at times, and Max get some credit, but a lot of other teams, their second string players also get a lot of. Let us in a little bit on some of those players who have really impressed you, who you think have been important contributors as you've now had to rebuild the depth of your program with all those players leaving.
Yeah, absolutely. Even just starting at my kind of normal rotation, and you've called out both of them just over the course of the episode so far, but like Nathan Podolsky, Ben Schluter, I often feel a lot more comfortable in what I'm able to do, whether it's on field or off, knowing that I have either of them or both of them behind me to sort of pick up the slack, or if I have a downshift, knowing one of them can come in and give a similar type of aggression, but just with a different look. Both of them, we all, I guess, three of us have somewhat different play styles. And I guess Nathan donning the keeper headband for a game this weekend, notwithstanding a move that I don't know I fully endorse, and I would do not besmirch him. The attempt, I know he's upset he didn't get any buckets, but it is what it is. But having those two, kind of behind me in my rotation, specifically with beater headbands on, and I know that they're starting to finally get the recognition that they so duly deserve, having been a part of this program and their respective college programs for a long time. Ben Zimmett is somebody who came from a program that we're trying to see a lot, or that we're looking to as sort of like our next phase, just because we have, one club team and one USQ official college team in this area. McAllister represents another potential player base of folks that we can hopefully bring into the fold who have been with the team, in certain capacities the last couple summers. Phoebe Thomas is new, an MLQ rookie this year. They had a great sort of like protect the quad ball play while the rest of her team was tagging out. That was maybe my favorite play of the weekend. It didn't result in a goal. I think it resulted in a turnover shortly thereafter. But seeing those little things pan out in flashes with players who are as of yet unproven and who haven't gotten a lot of these fast-paced, high level or the highest, pace of play reps of quad ball that the sport has to offer. You really, I don't know, it's heartening for a coach to see, and then hopefully anybody else who might be paying attention to the North Division. I don't know. Those are some of the folks that come to mind.
For sure. You mentioned, kind of Chicago taking, next step, this Detroit team up and rising. And I mean, obviously this kind of all started last championships with you guys beating Boston and, making, is that something that not necessarily that your, leadership teams are talking to, but a vibe that's kind of going through your division as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. The bits and pieces that I pick up, I feel like we have relatively good relationships with a lot of the Chicago franchise, the Detroit franchise as well. And the vibes are friendly, competitive enough between, the division, as far as I can tell, unless there's something that they're not telling me. But as somebody who is a coach of a North Division team and who's, sitting at not the record that I would want my team to be at, it kind of sucks, but as a fan of the sport and as an advocate for parity and competitive games and for the North Division to, kind of see the resurgence that a lot of us as fans of the sport have wanted to see for some time. It's, for lack of a better way to put it, it's really cool. I love, as a fan of the sport, I love seeing, if it can't be me, like it's great to see, these other teams in the North getting their flowers, and not just getting their flowers, but earning them as well. And it's hopefully, I can only speak for myself, and I'm sure the rest of our franchise and coaching staff feel it as well. But we're hoping that it kind of develops that edge to where, like, well, remember when that used to be us. So hopefully that kind of nudges us back towards there, so we can get multiple North teams representing us, in the latter stages of MLQ champs.
For sure. You might have heard us mention, kind of the struggle so far in the flag runner game for you guys this season. What do you think hasn't been working there? What are you guys looking to focus on, going to this Toronto series and championships?
Yeah, I admittedly don't have a great answer for that yet. If not to just chalk it up to the Chicago and Detroit really stepping it up in that capacity. It's not flimsy is not the right word, but it's it's an unforgiving, volatile part of the game in that there's a lot of things that are outside of my control as a coach and as a player on pitch who might be playing as frop is happening. There's an element of randomness to be certain, but I think it's as much as I feel like we maybe aren't, and myself, playing a big role in our frop plans on the beating side. Maybe we're game planning certain things wrong. Maybe I'm just not executing, but I can't help but give props to the Detroit and Chicago personnel for understanding that kind of what their strengths are, how they need to execute in those types of situations. Chicago not necessarily needing the pull as their games were necessarily as close as ours and Detroit's were, and still pulling anyway. So yeah, that's something we're of course looking to in the coming weeks drill on a little bit better, talk about more with our seekers, with our beaters, with really everybody, just to determine the best route forward against Toronto. Certainly not a series that we can catch our breath during. They're going to bring it to us. So yeah, it's still, a lot of room for improvement. We're not, raising or sounding the alarms. There we go. We're not sounding the alarms just yet, just because we know that there's a lot of, volatility with that side of the game. But at the same time, it makes a lot of things, as fans of the game know, it makes a lot of things easier when you catch the flag runner. So we'll hopefully, it's got a few weeks to improve on that, hopefully.
Yeah, Cody, thanks for joining us. We talked about this Toronto series coming up, mentioned that, a run through bracket play at MLQ Championship, the playing bracket, is the goal. What do you feel like are some of the things that you can control, outside of the volatile, flag runner on pitch game? Like what's been the messaging, post this super series? How do you feel like you can improve?
Yeah, a lot of it, for lack of a better way of putting it, comes down to really silly things, just like keep the motor running. The type of thing that we've been preaching this season is just empty the tank when you're on pitch. If each of us individually aren't giving it our all, then probably not going to do very well, no matter what the opponent, no matter what the stage or scenario. So at the base most level, that's a big part of it that we've been preaching. If everything else is failing us and them being as tough opponents as they are, we didn't execute as many offensive, offensive motions as we kind of sank back into our more base instincts, just from our respective college and club teams. There was a little bit more active play calling, certainly still not, our best showcasing of quaffle movement, on and off ball and things like that. But we saw those things start to come out in the later stages of Super Series weekend. Those sorts of things, even if they don't result in a bucket, or they don't result in the look that we want, or we don't get dodgeball control off of them, just executing the looks to show ourselves that, these motions that we have in our back pocket, we can bust them out at any time. They're, they might be our get out of jail free card depending on the scenario. It's just little things like that, forcing our legs and our arms to make these movements. These sorts of things that we've been, looking to, that we've been reiterating over the course of the summer, just mapping those over to live ball play against, tough North Division opponents. Just kind of, and then, hopefully taking flight from there, butterfly stuff.
Awesome. Well, Cody, thanks so much, as always, for taking the time. You are one of the favorite friends of the program. It's why we love having you on, even in a series that, maybe doesn't go your way. It's still always a pleasure to hear your thoughts. So we appreciate it. Best of luck with Toronto, and we'll be seeing you guys at MLQ Championships as well.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Take it easy.
Well, that's going to do it for another episode of MLQ Replay. We've got clinching week coming up here in MLQ in the weekend to come. 3 teams that control their own destiny for clinching their divisions will be in action. New York will be taking on the Charlotte Aviators down in Charlotte. They need to win 2 games in that series to clinch the East Division. Otherwise, it goes to Boston. In the North Division, the Chicago Prowl will be hosting the Toronto Raiders. They also will need 2 wins in that series to clinch the division. Otherwise, Detroit wins the division. And in the South, San Antonio taking on the Curse. San Antonio needs to sweep New Orleans to win the division. Otherwise, Austin wins the division. Thank you, everybody, for watching us. As always, thanks to all our guests, our producer, Jerry Shea, and also to Jack and Naresh for your time. We'll see you again next week. Just 2 weeks left in the regular season. We hope we'll be seeing you at championships as well at Howard County. Tickets are available now.